Hey, it's Justin Harvey. Thanks for tuning into the Anesthesia and Pain Management Success podcast. With APM Success, we take a close look at important topics pertaining to business, practice management, personal finance, and careers for anesthesiologists and pain management physicians. We work hard to take your critical questions straight to the experts. Thanks for listening. Greetings, everyone. This week, episode 251. We're going to be doing a listener mailbag. But first, a couple housekeeping items. Fall is right around the corner. I love this time of year because I can finally stop sweating here in Portland, Oregon. The Pacific Northwest is beautiful this time of year with the fresh hop beers freely flowing in abundance, the crystal blue skies, no humidity. It is absolutely gorgeous. We're soaking up every moment of it that we can. At APM Wealth, we're doing fall planning meetings with all of our clients over the next couple months. This is also a great time, if you're not currently working with an advisor, to sit down and take stock of your own circumstances, do a little bit of year-end planning, make sure that you're on target to max out your 401k, that if you're doing your backdoor Roth, that happens timely. Probably got benefits elections right around the corner. Doing some updates there with your employer benefits is also a way to do all the financial housekeeping. If you're a fellow or resident, and you're wrapping up training, this is your final year in training, and you want to have me address your program about some key considerations for financial success in your first job and making your transition to attendinghood, I do have a few openings to do this in the next few weeks before our fall planning meetings start in the beginning of October. So second half of September would be a good time for this. I've got 6 or 8 of these on the books through the next couple months and could take on a few more. If you're interested, reach out, Justin at apm-wealth.com, and we can get something on the books. Would love to help as many trainees out there as possible, be well equipped for the big financial decisions that await. Okay, listener mailbag. I have received a bunch of questions. I've narrowed it down to a few of them that I want to address. These are common questions that I, hear from friends, but also clients are working through over time. And so I know a lot of these are going to be applicable for folks in our audience. The first is, how should I prioritize paying off student loans versus investing in retirement accounts like a 401k or Roth IRA? One of the challenges of being a physician in your 30s is there are many competing goals. I'm trying to buy a house. Maybe I'm trying to buy into a practice. I'm trying to start saving for retirement. And by the way, I'm behind because I've, spent the last decade doing training and in med school. And maybe I have kids, maybe I have childcare expenses that are new. There's just so many different goals clamoring for your dollars. It's hard to know how to allocate them at first blush. So the first thing you want to do is just sit down and prioritize what is most important to you. And generally, whenever you're making a transition to attendinghood, before all of those new dollars that you're going to be earning have been allocated, there is an opportunity for those new dollars to be put in a hierarchy to say, okay, here's my goals. Number 1, number 2, number 3. They're in descending order of importance. I want to allocate dollars. Number 1, number 2, number 3. And the nice thing about on the retirement savings side of things, some of these goals are capped in terms of the maximum dollars that you can put towards them. So student loans is not that way. You can pay off, as much student debt in a given year that you want to, up to the full amount of your debt. But with retirement savings, if you're participating in a 401k as an employee, there's a max amount you can do. That max amount is $23,000 in 2024. If you're over age 50, there's an extra $7,500 that gets thrown on top. If you want to do that Roth IRA contribution, or if you're a high earner, it would be the backdoor Roth IRA. There's a maximum $7,000 per year that you can do. So as you're thinking about the disparate goals that you have, making a meaningful contribution towards your retirement might only be a 401k and a Roth IRA. We're maxing those out. That's $30,000 if you're a single taxpayer. If you're married and your spouse has income and participates in an employer plan, then this would be doubled. It would be 30 plus 30, 60,000 total. And then any dollars above and beyond that you want to contribute towards wealth building, that's when things get interesting. Then we're talking about taxable investment accounts. We're talking about debt pay down. We're talking about saving for other goals like your kids' education. So often my recommendation for someone, especially who's newer in attendinghood, is to max out the retirement accounts available to you. So max out that 401k, max out the backdoor Roth, do it for your spouse as well if you're married. And then sort of re-ask the question, what are our priorities above and beyond these sort of low-hanging fruit of income tax reducing contributions. And that's when we may want to look seriously at an aggressive student loan paydown plan. Understanding your path for student debt paydown, whether it's like I'm going to aggressively pay this off and get out of debt as soon as possible, or whether it's I'm going to pay as little as possible for as long as is required until PSLF is achieved. Having clarity on that path forward for student loans is the first step toward determining how much should I pay on the loans. You don't want to be wishy-washy and make some extra payments and then change your mind and then say, you know what, forgiveness is actually what I want to do, because then any extra payments you make are just going to be wasted. So figure out if PSLF makes sense. Highly recommend studentloanplanner.com. My good friend Travis Hornsby founded that company a number of years ago, and they've been doing incredible work for many, many thousands of borrowers. I used to do some consulting as a student loan consultant with SLP. I currently have no affiliation other than I respect the heck out of what they're doing. Check them out if you're looking for some help. Right now, I will say this is a very tumultuous time in terms of student loan payment plans, and Save is getting, discontinued seemingly with recent judicial decisions, but there's a lot of things in limbo. The Department of Ed is trying to get their online platform up and running so that borrowers can elect new payment plans. It's taking months for servicers to process paper applications. So it's a little bit of a disaster. Honestly, most people should just sit on their hands for the next 2 months, not do anything, and then re-ask all of these questions in 2 or 3 months. But if you do want a detailed analysis and you're not already a current client of APM Wealth, go to studentloanplanner.com, check them out, let them know I sent you, tell Travis I said hi. They'll take great care of you. So that's how I would think about prioritization, especially in your early attending years of student loan paydown versus investment. If you do find yourself on that PSLF path, or if you don't have a lot of student loans, then you are thinking about other goals, wealth building versus a home down payment or whatever. If you find yourself wanting to buy a home that isn't going to require a significant down payment, you're going to be someone who wants to consider probably a taxable investment account where you're putting money in it's not inherently tax advantaged, but it can be managed in a way that creates tax benefit. A taxable investment account has no lockup the way a 401k or an IRA does, where there's a lot of rules around contributions and distributions and certain ages and certain dollar amounts, et cetera. It's totally unrestricted. You could put $1 million in it today and take the $1 million out tomorrow. And if there's gains, you pay taxes. But if you don't realize any gains, or if you continue to buy, your dollar cost averaging into the market over time, that's a great way to build wealth. You don't have to worry about the constraints associated with a retirement account. That type of account, that taxable investment account, is something you're going to want to strongly consider. And as you build meaningful taxable assets, I will say that this is an area in which an advisor in particular can add a lot of value with a thoughtful investment management approach. So just be aware that once you start doing that, it's great to max out all your employer plans and to do the backdoor Roth. Once you start getting into taxable investing, there is all of a sudden, it's kind of like being self-employed in certain ways. There's a lot more opportunity for optimization. And so just being aware of that is really important. Second question, should I consider buying a home early in my career, or is it better to continue renting? I don't like wasting money on rent. I've talked about this on the show quite a bit. Listeners may remember I just bought a house this year with my family. We've been asking similar questions for our family. My wife is an anesthesiologist here in Portland. We've got a few kids, and renting was something that we were comfortable doing for quite a while. We rented for a few years. I generally do recommend especially when you're moving across the country to take a new job, renting gives you flexibility, and it decreases the friction of transaction cost if you have to move. So it's just one way to keep your options open if you're moving for a job and it looks good, but you're not really sure if it's going to be a long-term fit. So there can be an advantage to renting to maintain flexibility. And frankly, there can be an advantage even to paying a premium. Like if it would cost you more to rent than it would to buy, sometimes it's still worth doing that anyway, because then you don't have to go through the whole rigmarole of selling a house, paying the seller's agent and the buyer's agent and all the costs associated with transaction and taxes and things like that. You just walk away after 12 months. And so it's a little cleaner. One other thing to note, and we did treat this topic pretty extensively in the recent episode on should I buy a home, what good is a mortgage? Is renting really throwing away money? We'll link to that in the show notes. If you go to apmsuccess.com/251, we'll put a couple of those links there. But on the front end of an amortization schedule, whenever you buy a house, you get a 30-year mortgage, you get that fixed payment amount, call it $10,000 a month on a property that's like $1.4 million or something. $10,000 a month, very little of that $10,000 a month payment is actually paying down your principal on your mortgage. If you buy a $1.4 million house, you put a little bit of money down, say you've got a $1.2 million mortgage, you're paying $10,000 a month. In the first year, you pay 120 grand. But of every $10,000 payment, you may only have like $1,200 that is actually going to principal. And so the debt pay down is much slower than you would assume. If in the first year I'm paying 120 grand, I'm actually only paying off like $15,000 worth of principal in some cases. Now, there is some tax benefit because mortgage interest is tax deductible up to a certain amount. But the point is, it's complicated. Renting is not throwing away money. It's maintaining flexibility, especially earlier in your career when if you need to move for another job, or if you can go and take that raise, or if your spouse gets another job and you want to get out of town, or you want to move back to where you grew up or whatever, the flexibility afforded you by renting can be really, really valuable beyond just the dollars and cents of what does this mean for me in the next 12 months and the rent versus buy cost differential. Third question. I'm considering buying into a private practice. What financial considerations should I keep in mind if I'm planning to buy or join a partnership in the next few years? Looks like this is from a pain management physician. Buying into a business is complex, especially if it's a smaller physician-owned business. Then the idiosyncrasies of personality and this is the way it's always been done type of thinking can loom larger than even in a more sort of corporatized private practice setting. So a couple financial and non-financial things to think about. Number one, in terms of the financials, if I'm looking at buying into a practice, or we could also say a surgery center or other medically related business, you want to understand what you're buying. What is the story of the business qualitatively? What are the opportunities that exist for that business? And what is the performance of the business quantitatively? What are the revenues? What are the costs? Which costs are climbing the most year over year? What are the biggest threats to the business? And finally, what is the profit that results from the revenue minus the cost? A business that's not profitable is not going to distribute anything to you above and beyond just your wage for working in the business. So a practice needs a real plan to profitability if it's not already making money in order to be worth buying. So if you're buying into a medical practice, you want to make sure that you are understanding the books. You should probably have your financial advisor or CPA review the financials. I always ask when I'm doing this for clients, I like 3 years of profit and loss statements, 3 years of balance sheet. When possible, I like to see the capital table to understand who are the other owners, what percentages do they own, and what kind of incentive does that create among the owners. For example, if a practice is 75% owned by a physician who's older and who is responsible for the lion's share of patient volume in some cases, especially if it's procedure volume in a surgery center. When that doctor retires, what's going to happen to all that volume? Is the profitability tied to that physician's efforts? And does that create a sort of meaningful risk that that doctor is either going to retire or have a health event that's going to preclude their ongoing participation at the same pace? Sometimes there can be an internal succession where those patients are sort of successfully passed on to the younger generation, but that is a complicated thing. And because of because of how lucrative it is for, if you own shares in a profitable surgery center, people don't want to let those go when they're making a lot of money. So it can create a lot of problems, but just understanding what is the composition of the capital structure of the ownership and the volume and the revenue associated with the capital structure. That will tell you a lot about what are the prospects on a prospective basis for any given practice or medical related business. And then finally, if you're looking at partnership in particular, you want to understand, especially in the context of a smaller group, like how are we going to divide and conquer the responsibilities associated with running a business? Because you go from, if you're an employee, you're functionally, you have clinical responsibilities and maybe a little bit of business or marketing related responsibilities. But at the end of the day, if the business isn't making money, you're earning your salary or your production pay, and it's kind of not your problem. And it's kind of not your problem if the girl at the front desk decides to rage quit randomly on a Tuesday when your clinic is way backed up, or if your copy machine or your fax machine breaks in the middle of the day. It's not your problem. But if you're an owner, it is your problem. It does affect your profitability. It does affect your Google reviews, and it is going to impact the performance of your business and ultimately your paycheck. So when you go from employee to partner, A, you want to make sure that you're like emotionally prepared for that and that it's something that you actually want. And then B, in the context of you being added to an existing partnership, you want to understand, what do you have a say over? What are you going to be responsible for? And what are the responsibilities of the other partner physicians? There's a great book I recommend called The Partnership Charter. And we did another episode in the past titled, tongue-in-cheekily, "A Partnership is a Sinking Ship." A good financial advisor friend of mine once told me that. And so being aware of the headwinds that are created by a partnership is really important. So that's all I'd say about that. Every partnership opportunity needs to be investigated on its own merits. Obviously, in many cases, it can be very successful and rewarding. And then you have sort of cross coverage for if you want to take a vacation, for example. But it does come with hazards. Okay, last question. How can I effectively plan for my children's education while continuing to save for retirement? Another very common question that I see from those like 40-something physicians who are, they're making good money, they own a house, and they're starting to think about, we've got a few kids, we want to give them the opportunity that we have been given in some cases, and we want their higher ed to be something that we cover. In those circumstances, it's important to, think about your kids and your family's needs and your family's values. And then what does it look like to express your family's values in support of your children? In other words, like, are we going to pay for college for our kids? If so, how much? Are we going to just full ticket, like wherever you want to go, in-state, out-of-state, public, private, whatever you want to do that, then that's great. And that's an important first step to establish, here's what we want to accomplish. And we'll just take this as a straw man example preliminarily. If you've got 3 kids and you want to pay for everything, understanding the likely tuition that you're going to need to pay is a first step. And, right now we're seeing private schools, total cost of attendance for a single calendar year approaching $100,000. So depending on the age of your kids, you're going to need to slap an inflation rate on that. But that's not a bad start if you're planning, because you're not going to get any need-based aid if you're a physician. However, it is important to think about all the potential ways in which you can fund those tuition bills, because it's, 529 is a tool that can be used to save in a tax-advantaged way for your kids' education. However, 529 is a restricted account. The assets in a 529 can only be used in a certain number of ways. It's got to be used for qualifying education expenses. Otherwise, the disbursements are going to be penalized. So it's possible that your kid may want to, do something with the military, may want to go to a trade school that's going to be much less expensive. They may want to take a couple gap years. They may not want to go to college at all. They may realize that in the year 2032, by the time they finally get to college, they can actually make $300,000 a year being an electrician, and they want to go to trade school instead, and because that's the quickest path to business ownership. There's a lot of potentials in the future, obviously. And so keeping your options open in education funding is generally what I recommend. And what that really means in this context of you want to meaningfully contribute to your kids' education, but you want to keep your options open, is setting a ratio of, here's how much we're going to pay in a 529, and here's how much we're going to pay from a combination of cash flow, taxable investment account, and potential loans in the future. And what that does is, if your kid does decide to go to trade school in the future, you can, if you were planning on 4 years times $100,000, so $400,000, and in the future they end up doing an in-state option or a trade school and it's much more affordable, you can not have the entire $400,000 that you're planning on spending being in a 529, because then you're going to have way oversaved, and then you're going to have a bunch of money left over that is restricted. You can't get it out without penalty. Now, they are creating a safety valve with some recent legislation where some of that can be converted into a Roth IRA, but it's only $35,000 total. It's only 1 calendar year at a time. So it takes a while, and it's just not a real optimal situation. So a better situation would be to say, okay, if 400,000 total funding is the goal, we're going to do $200,000 in a 529. We're going to capture all the state income tax benefits to the extent that they exist. We're going to get the tax deferred growth on a meaningful sum. And then we're going to pay for the other 200,000 if they do go with the most expensive option. And if the total bill is 400,000, we're going to pay half with the 529. We're going to pay the other half with the taxable investment account that we've been saving into. Or we're going to be making a lot of money at that point, so we'll just cut a check if we can from our emergency fund or what have you. Also important to note is that there is portability within a family unit for a 529. So if you've got 4 kids, if 2 of your kids take less expensive options and 2 take more expensive options, it is possible to move money from one child to the other in terms of the 529 distributions to be able to cover the cost of attendance. So there is some flexibility there that is helpful, but I generally fear that it is over saving if you target the full cost of attendance with the 529. I just think that's it's not allowing for many of the other potential things that may happen. Not to mention, it's my personal opinion that, and this probably comes from all of my student loan counseling that I alluded to earlier, I think that higher ed is like ripe to get blown up in terms of the costs charged and the value provided. And I just think that as costs continue to spiral into the stratosphere, this cannot continue. The things that you get by that diploma, they're just way less valuable than what you have to pay to get them. And as student loan becomes more and more of a problem, and even, if you look at graduate degrees, a lot of undergrad degrees only qualify you to go to grad school. And so should I really have to go several $100,000 in debt only to go several $100,000 more in debt? That just strains my reason. So being aware of these macro trends and some of the disruptive technologies, platforms, employers who say like, you don't need to, go to a 4-year degree, just do our 3-month boot camp, and then you're going to be a qualified employee for our company. I think those types of solutions are going to get more and more popular. So keeping all that in view, that's how I would think about saving for education. And then, when you are sort of funding in this way of a multi-prong approach where there's some 529, but also a lot of taxable assets. The listener's question here was, how can I plan for education while continuing to save for retirement? That taxable account can be used for whatever purpose. You can sell it and buy the ski chalet in Colorado, or you can have it as like your financial independence bucket, where if you want to punch out at age 52, you can use that pot of money to fund your living expenses for a number of years. So it does give you the flexibility because of the lack of restrictions on withdrawals from that type of account. So hope this is helpful. This is a really fun format for me. So we're going to do another listener mailbag here, probably, at the beginning of next year. Thanks for tuning in as always. Talk to you again next week. If you liked what you heard this week, head on over to apmsuccess.com, where you can find more content and free resources to help you build a successful career in anesthesia and pain management. If you wanted to leave a review in iTunes, I'd also really appreciate it. Thanks for using some of your valuable time to join me today on APM Success.